The Galactic Unity Summit was, in Captain Nora professional opinion, the most boring assignment she'd ever pulled, which was really saying something, considering she'd once spent 6 months cataloging supply inventory on a deep space mining station, where the most exciting event was someone microwaving fish in the break room. Concordia 9 was impressive, sure. Massive orbital station, gleaming diplomatic halls, representatives from 43 species all gathered to discuss trade agreements and peace accords and other things that made Nora want to take a nap. Her job as human medical liaison? Stand in the corner. Look professional. Be ready to dispense band-aids if some dignitary got a paper cut. Glorified first aid kit with legs, she muttered, adjusting her dress uniform for the 18th time. The thing was too stiff, too formal, and absolutely not designed for someone who was used to combat fatigues and blood-splattered scrubs. The ceremony was in full swing. High Alpha Kravik of the Shen'tar Empire was at the center podium, massive and imposing. Think wolf crossed with warrior, standing 8 feet tall with silver-black fur, and eyes that could cut through steel. He was mid-speech about interspecies cooperation when someone in the diplomatic gallery moved wrong. Too fast. Too purposeful. Nora's combat instincts kicked in before her brain caught up. The blade came from nowhere, thrown with precision that spoke of professional training. It caught Kravik in the side, just below the ribs, and kept going, deep enough to matter. The High Alpha staggered. Crimson blood, darker than human, spread across his ceremonial armor. The council chamber erupted. 43 species, 43 different panic protocols. Some screamed, some scattered. The Threen delegates activated personal shields. The Vexali started a harmonic distress call that made Nora's teeth hurt. Kravik's honor guard, 6 massive Shen'tar warriors, closed ranks around their fallen alpha, weapons drawn, scanning for additional threats. And Nora thought, well, there goes the boring part of my day. She was moving before anyone else processed what happened. Combat medic training, 8 years in the worst hellholes Earth could produce, made her body react while everyone else was still screaming. She pushed through the crowd, medical pack already in hand, assessing from a distance. Arterial bleed. Had to be, given the blood volume. Blade still in the wound. Good, that was buying time. But the way Kravik was moving, the way his pupils were dilating. Poison. Definitely poison. "Medic!" someone shouted. Finally. Nora reached the honor guard perimeter. They'd formed a wall around Kravik, who was now on one knee, one hand pressed against the wound, the other braced on the floor. "Let me through," Nora said. The nearest guard, female, scarred face, lieutenant's markings, bared teeth. "Stand back, human. This is pack business." "Yeah, and I'm the medical officer. So unless you want to watch your alpha bleed out, move." "He dies with honor. Alone. This is our way." Nora blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" Kravik's second-in-command stepped forward. Commander Vesh, Nora remembered from the briefing files. Female, silver fur, eyes like amber. "Shen'tar law. An alpha who falls in combat must face death alone. To interfere is to dishonor—" "Yeah, that's not happening." Nora pushed past her. The guard was too shocked to stop her. Nobody ever pushed past Shen'tar honor guards. Nobody ever ignored their protocols. Nora dropped to her knees beside Kravik, hands already moving, assessing damage with practiced efficiency. Deep puncture wound. Blade nicked the hepatic artery, or whatever the Shen'tar equivalent was. Poison spreading fast, she could see it in the darkening veins around the wound site. "Okay," she said, pulling out her field cauterizer. "Poison, arterial bleed, about 3 minutes to hemorrhagic shock, standard Tuesday." Kravik's eyes focused on her with obvious effort. His voice came out gravelly, damaged. "Human, step away. This is not your death. And it's not gonna be yours either." Nora activated the cauterizer, its blue light casting sharp shadows. "Hold still. This is going to hurt. You do not understand. I understand you're bleeding out. Everything else is secondary." She pulled the blade free in one smooth motion. Letting it stay in was buying time they didn't have, and immediately applied pressure. Blood poured over her hands, hot and thick. 3 minutes. Maybe less. Behind her, Vesh was saying something urgent, but Nora tuned it out. Combat Medicine 101. Focus on the patient. Block out everything else. She needed to cauterize the artery, stop the poison spread, stabilize him long enough for proper medical intervention. You cannot touch him, Vesh's voice cut through. The pack bond will… Too late. Nora had already made skin contact, her bare hand pressing against Kravik's furred side as she applied the cauterizer. The blue light flared bright, sealing the wound with practiced precision. Something happened. Not physically. Not exactly. It was like a door opening in her head, a connection snapping into place that had no business existing. She felt Kravik's presence, not thoughts, but sensation, pain, determination, and underneath it all, resignation. He was ready to die. Well, too bad. Nora didn't do death. Not on her watch. The cauterizer finished its work. The bleeding stopped. Kravik's wound sealed with a hiss of burning tissue. And then Nora felt it. Pain. Blooming in her side, exactly where Kravik had been stabbed. Not phantom pain. Real, visceral agony that made her gasp and nearly drop the cauterizer. She looked down. Her uniform was darkening with blood. Her blood. Her side was opening, tearing, as if an invisible blade had just carved through her own flesh. The poison followed, burning through her veins like liquid fire, her vision starting to blur at the edges. "Oh," she said, very calmly considering the circumstances. "That's new." Kravik's wound was closing. She could see it through the tattered remains of his armor. Flesh knitting together, blood flow stopping, the dark poison veins receding. Her wound was opening. The pack bond, her brain supplied dimly. "Vesh tried to warn you. The Shen'tar can redistribute damage through pack connections. You just accidentally volunteered to take his place." "Huh," Nora managed. "That's inconvenient." Her legs gave out. She hit the floor hard, one hand pressed against her bleeding side, the other still holding the cauterizer like it might somehow help. The council chamber went silent. Not the shocked silence from the assassination attempt. This was different. Heavier. The kind of silence that came when something impossible had just happened and nobody knew how to process it. Nora's vision tunneled. The poison was working fast. Faster in her human biology than it would have in Shen'tar physiology. She had maybe 90 seconds before unconsciousness, 60 before organ failure, 30 before it didn't matter anymore. Through the haze, she saw Kravik standing. Actually standing. The wound gone, the poison cleared, looking down at her with an expression she couldn't read. "You took it," he said. His voice sounded distant, like it was coming from underwater. "You took the death wound." "Yeah," Nora slurred. Seemed like the thing to do. Vesh was shouting orders. Medical teams were rushing in. Too slow. All too slow. Nora's hand slipped from her side. Blood pooled beneath her, spreading across the pristine diplomatic floor. She tried to say something witty, something sarcastic, something to break the tension. But her mouth wouldn't work anymore. The last thing she saw before darkness took her was the entire council chamber. Hundreds of delegates from dozens of species, standing frozen, watching the human medical liaison bleed out from a wound she'd taken from an alien alpha. And in the very back of her fading consciousness, one thought crystallized with perfect clarity. I am definitely filing an incident report about this. Waking up hurt. Not the sharp, immediate pain of the wound transfer, that had been almost clinical in its precision, like getting stabbed by a very organized knife. This was different. This was the dull, pervasive ache of a body that had been through trauma, patched back together, and was now sending strongly worded complaints to management. Nora's eyes opened slowly. White ceiling, medical bay, the antiseptic smell that was universal across species. She tried to sit up. Her body vetoed that idea immediately. "Do not move." The voice was familiar. Commander Vesh, standing beside the bed like she'd been there for hours, which, judging by her exhausted posture, she probably had been. Nora turned her head, the one movement that didn't make her entire torso scream. The medical bay was full. Not with patients, but with Shen'tar. The entire delegation, by the look of it, standing in what could only be described as a vigil. "How long was I out?" Nora's voice came out raspy. 38 hours. You nearly died 6 times. Vesh moved closer, her amber eyes intense. The medical team said your survival was improbable. Yeah, I get that a lot. Nora managed a weak smile. Alpha Kravik? Alive. Fully recovered. Because you took the Alpha's death wound as your own. Vesh's tone shifted, became formal, waited. You invoked the ancient rite of pact joining. Nora blinked. I did what now? The Shen'tar in the room all reacted. Ears forward, postures rigid. Like she'd just said something shocking. Vesh sat down carefully on the edge of the medical bed. Pact joining. A sacred bond between Shen'tar. It allows the voluntary transfer of injury, death, burden. It is only invoked between bloodkin, in moments of absolute sacrifice. Okay, but I'm not bloodkin. I'm not even the same species. That is what makes this unprecedented. Vesh gestured to the assembled Shen'tar. Pact joining is a myth to most of us. It hasn't been successfully invoked in over 600 years. It requires perfect selflessness. Complete willingness to accept another's death as your own. Nora processed this. But I didn't know about any of that. I was just doing my job. He was bleeding out. What was I supposed to do, let him die? Every Shen'tar in the room stared at her. Vesh's expression was unreadable. Yes, that is exactly what you were supposed to do. That's insane. That is our way. An Alpha faces death alone. It is honor. It is tradition. It's stupid. Nora tried to sit up again, managed it this time despite the protest from her abdomen. You're telling me I was supposed to just stand there and watch while… Yes. Well, that wasn't happening. Nora looked down at her side where bandages covered what she assumed was a spectacular wound. How bad is it? You will recover, eventually. The wound was significant. The poison would have killed you if not for immediate intervention, and the fact that Shen'tar physiology partially metabolized it before the transfer completed. Lucky me. You do not understand the magnitude of what you have done. Vesh stood, pacing. You are human. You should not have been able to invoke pact joining. The bond should not have accepted you. But it did. And now the entire Galactic Council is in emergency session trying to determine what that means. Nora's medical monitor chose that moment to display her elevated heart rate. Emergency session? You have created a legal and cultural crisis of unprecedented scale. I saved someone's life. How is that a crisis? Vesh's laugh was sharp, humorless. Because you are not supposed to be able to do that. The council emergency session was, according to the live feed Vesh reluctantly pulled up on the medical bay's holoscreen, going about as well as could be expected. Which is to say, it was a complete disaster. The human violated sacred protocols. A traditionalist Shen'tar, older, scarred, traditional clan markings, was currently addressing the assembled council. She touched the Alpha during his death moment. This is desecration. She saved his life. This from a pragmatist delegate, younger progressive faction. That should count for something. There is no legal framework for interspecies pact joining. A bird-like alien, bureaucratic species, Nora vaguely remembered from her briefing materials, gestured with multiple wing arms at floating legal texts. The accords are very clear. Pact joining is a Shen'tar cultural practice, reserved for Shen'tar participants with… Enough. The chamber went silent. High Alpha Kravik stood from his seat. He looked different than Nora remembered. Healthier, obviously, but also carrying himself with the kind of authority that made even the holoscreen feel heavy. She took my death wound, he said simply. By blood and sacrifice, she invoked the ancient rite. Whether she knew the words or not, whether she understood the tradition or not, she fulfilled every requirement. He turned to address the full council. She is pact now. By right of action. By law of blood. The bureaucratic bird alien's feathers ruffled in obvious distress. High Alpha, with all respect, that is not how this works. Humans are not Shen'tar. There is no legal framework for… There is now. The declaration hung in the air. Nora, watching from her medical bed, felt compelled to interject. Can someone please explain why everyone's acting like I did something weird? I've literally done this before. Once in Kandahar, Vesh cut the feed. Immediately, she turned to the medical staff. Never let her finish that story. I was just going to say I once took shrapnel meant for my squad leader. Stop talking. And nobody made it a whole political thing. Stop talking. Nora stopped talking. Vesh pinched the bridge of her muzzle in a gesture that was apparently universal across species. You are going to make this situation exponentially worse if you keep comparing sacred rituals to your military anecdotes. But they're basically the same thing. They are absolutely not the same thing. Vesh's ears went flat. One is a mystical bond forged through selfless sacrifice. The other is Tuesday? Combat trauma that you are disturbingly casual about. A medical technician, human, thankfully, approached with a datapad. Captain Kellen, you've been formally summoned to the pack recognition ceremony. It's in 6 hours. Nora looked at Vesh. What's a pack recognition ceremony? Exactly what it sounds like. High Alpha Kravik will formally acknowledge you as Shen'tar Pack before the assembled council. It is mandatory. It is historic. It has never been done with a non-Shen'tar. Vesh paused. You must attend. I'm not really in standing upright condition right now. Shen'tar protocol demands you present yourself. You must stand before the council to accept. Then we carry you, Vesh said. Nora shook her head. That's dramatic. This entire situation is dramatic. You made it dramatic. Vesh's tone softened slightly. You could have stayed in the corner, dispensed your band-aids, gone home after the summit. But you didn't. You interfered. You saved him. You took the wound. And now, she gestured at the holoscreen still showing the council debate. Now you must face the consequences. Nora looked down at her bandaged side, tried to imagine standing for any length of time. Her pain levels were currently somewhere between maybe and absolutely not. How hard can standing be? She muttered. Vesh's expression suggested she'd heard those famous last words before. 6 hours later, heavily medicated and seriously regretting every life choice that had led to this moment, Nora stood at the entrance to the council chamber. Well, stood was generous. She was upright through sheer stubbornness and pharmaceutical intervention. The doors were massive, ornate, designed to intimidate. They were working. You can still let us carry you, Vesh offered one last time. And look weak? At a diplomatic thing? Nora shook her head. Not happening. You are human. You took a mortal wound 40 hours ago. No one expects. I expect. Nora adjusted her uniform, formal dress, hastily modified to accommodate the bandages. I'm walking in there on my own feet, or I'm not walking in at all. The doors began to open. Inside, the entire Galactic Council waited. Hundreds of delegates, dozens of species, all of them watching, all of them waiting to see if the human could stand. Nora took a breath, took a step. The wound protested immediately, sending lightning through her side. She took another step anyway. You are insane, Vesh whispered beside her. Yeah, Nora agreed. But I'm committed to the bit. The council chamber opened before them, and every eye turned to watch the human who shouldn't be able to walk, carrying a wound that should have killed an alpha, entering anyway. The first step was the hardest. Nora's entire body screamed at her to stop, to sit down, to let someone else handle this. The wound in her side felt like it was tearing open with every movement, despite the medical team's assurances that the tissue was healing properly. But she kept walking. The council chamber was massive, designed to accommodate hundreds of delegates from species ranging from human-sized to genuinely colossal. Right now, every single one of them was watching her. The silence was absolute. They'd expected her to be carried in, maybe on a medical stretcher, maybe in a hover chair. Definitely not walking under her own power less than 2 days after taking a wound that should have killed her. But here she was, walking. One hand pressed against her side, the other clenched at her side to keep from shaking. You could have let us carry you, Vesh murmured beside her, matching her pace. Yeah. But then I'd look weak. Nora's teeth were gritted so hard her jaw ached. Can't have that at a diplomatic thing. You are half dead and medicated beyond reason. Exactly. If I can stand while half dead and drugged, imagine how impressive I'll be at full capacity. That is not the logic you think it is. They passed the outer ring of delegates. Species Nora vaguely recognized from her briefing materials. The crystalline Vex, the floating drifters, the insectoid Threen. All of them watching with expressions she couldn't read. The Shen'tar honor guard stood at attention as she approached. 6 massive warriors, each one capable of tearing her apart without breaking a sweat. They parted. Like water around a stone, they stepped aside, creating a clear path to the center of the chamber where High Alpha Kravik waited. He stood from his seat of authority, an impressive throne-like structure that somehow managed to look both ancient and modern. His silver-black fur was immaculate, his ceremonial armor polished to perfection. And then, for the first time in recorded council history, he bowed. Not a nod. Not a gesture of acknowledgement. A full, formal bow. Head lowered, arms spread in the traditional Shen'tar sign of respect. To a human. Nora froze. Is this where I bow back, or? You could try, Vesh whispered. Though I suspect you would fall over. Fair point. Kravik straightened, his amber eyes meeting hers. When he spoke, his voice carried across the entire chamber with practiced authority. Captain Nora Kellen, you took my death, you carry my wound. By blood and sacrifice, by action and consequence, you are Pack. The formality of it hit Nora like a physical weight. This wasn't just a ceremony. This was history being written in real time. She tried to stand straighter, winced, gave up. With all due respect, Alpha, I was just doing my job. Your job does not require dying for another species. Actually, it kind of does. Nora shifted her weight, trying to find a position that didn't make her side scream. That's what combat medics do. We patch people up. Sometimes we take hits to do it. It's part of the deal. Murmurs rippled through the council. Species turning to each other, translators working overtime. Humans have combat medics who willingly endanger themselves. They accept injury to preserve others. That explains so much about their military doctrine. Kravik raised a hand, and silence returned. He extended it toward Nora. Palm up, claws retracted. A gesture of peace, of equality. Then I formally recognize you as Shen'tar Pack. You have earned the right to stand among us, to speak with our voice, to carry our honor. Nora looked at his extended hand, looked at the assembled council watching. Looked at Vesh, who nodded encouragingly. Does this come with health benefits? Nora asked. For a moment, nobody moved. Then someone laughed. A delegate in the back. One of the drifters, maybe. Then more joined in. A Threen's clicking laughter. A Vex's crystalline chiming. Even some of the Shen'tar honor guard were making sounds that might have been amusement. The tension that had been strangling the chamber broke like a snapped cable. Nora took Kravik's hand. His palm was warm, furred, completely alien. And somehow, in that moment, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Welcome to the Pack, he said quietly. And then Nora's legs gave out. It wasn't dramatic, wasn't sudden. Just a slow, inevitable collapse as every system in her body that had been running on pure stubbornness and painkillers finally filed a formal complaint with management. She felt herself falling, saw the floor rushing up, heard Vesh's sharp intake of breath. Kravik caught her, one arm around her back, the other supporting her weight with ease. She ended up half standing, half supported, looking like every epic hero statue she'd ever seen except significantly more pathetic. For a moment it looked like failure. Like she'd tried for something dramatic and noble and fallen short, literally. Then something happened. Every Shen'tar in the chamber stood. Not quickly. Not dramatically. But with synchronized purpose, the entire delegation rose from their seats as one. Then, the honor guard. Then, a Threen delegate. Then more. And more. Like a wave spreading across the chamber, species after species rising to their feet. The crystalline Vex, the floating drifters, the insectoid Threne, the bureaucratic Kelvin. The entire Galactic Council rose as one. Hundreds of delegates, dozens of species, all standing, not in shock, not in horror, in respect. Nora, barely conscious, supported by an alien alpha in front of the most powerful political body in the galaxy, managed to focus her eyes enough to see it happening. Her voice came out slurred, the painkillers finally winning their war against her consciousness. Did I do good? Vesh stepped closer, and Nora could see something impossible. Tears in her amber eyes. Shen'tar didn't cry. It was a biological impossibility, the briefing materials had said. Too much evolutionary pressure against showing vulnerability. Vesh was crying anyway. You did impossible, she said softly. The chamber was still standing, still silent, still watching. And Nora, who had spent her entire career patching people up in the worst conditions imaginable, who had never once let someone die if she could help it, who had accidentally invoked an ancient ritual by refusing to accept that death was inevitable. She passed out in the arms of an alien alpha, in front of the entire Galactic Council, having just become the first non-Shen'tar pack member in 600 years. The medical team rushed in immediately. Kravik lowered her gently to the floor, stepping back to give them space. The council remained standing, watching the humans work with the kind of efficient chaos that spoke of long practice. In the observation galleries, recorders captured everything. The footage would spread across the galaxy within hours. The human medical liaison who took a death wound, who invoked pack joining without knowing what it meant, who walked into the council chamber when she shouldn't have been able to stand. The debate started immediately. Across 1,000 worlds, in 100 languages, beings argued about what it meant. Was it recklessness, bravery, stupidity, heroism? The Threne military strategists called it tactical insanity. The Vex philosophers called it transcendent selflessness. The human delegation called it very on-brand for Nora. But in the council chamber, as the medical team stabilized her and prepared transport, as the delegates slowly returned to their seats, as Kravik stood watching with an expression that might have been pride or might have been concern. The question everyone was thinking, but nobody dared to ask. What else were humans capable of, if this was what happened when they were just doing their job? And in medical facilities across the galaxy, combat medics and emergency responders of every species watched the footage and thought, maybe we've been doing this wrong. 2 weeks later, Nora woke up to discover she was famous. Not got mentioned in a medical journal famous. Not gave a good presentation at a conference famous. Galactic news cycle, cross-species debate, her face on every major feed famous. Human invokes ancient right, scrolled across the medical bay's news feed. Medic saves Alpha through sacrifice, declared another. Interspecies pack bonding confirmed. What does this mean for galactic unity? Nora, still in her medical bed, stared at the feeds with increasing horror. Can everyone please calm down? I've done worse for less. Vesh, who'd apparently appointed herself permanent guardian, looked up from her datapad. You took a mortal wound meant for a high alpha. That is not worse for less. I once performed surgery in a collapsing building while under mortar fire. This was just standing still and bleeding. That does not make it better. The recovery had been collaborative. Shen'tar healers working alongside human doctors, comparing notes, combining techniques. Nora's wound was healing faster than it should have, probably something to do with the pack bond still lingering in her system. Kravik visited daily. He'd bring traditional Shen'tar recovery foods, mostly raw meat, some kind of fermented bone broth, things that made Nora's human stomach politely decline. You need proper nutrition, he'd insist. I need something cooked, Nora would counter. They'd compromised on protein shakes. On day 10, Kravik sat beside her bed and explained the consequences. You are the first non-Shen'tar in pack. There will be adjustments. Like what? Do I get a tail? You now have standing in Shen'tar society, political weight, voice in council decisions. He paused. You can speak on matters of pack honor, territorial disputes, military strategy. Nora absorbed this. I don't want political weight. I just want to do my job. Your job is now significantly more complicated. Great. Just what I always wanted. By week 2, 17 different species had requested interviews. 12 wanted to study her. 3 wanted to ban her from diplomatic events. And one very persistent Vex philosopher wanted to write her biography. Nora declined them all. The Galactic Medical Council, however, she couldn't decline. The session convened with appropriate bureaucratic pomp. Representatives from 40 species, all of them wanting to discuss the human problem. Nora watched from her medical bed via holoscreen, morbidly curious about what they'd say when she wasn't in the room. Humans demonstrate unprecedented pain tolerance, a Threen medical specialist reported. Their capacity to function through injury that would incapacitate most species is concerning. They also demonstrate pack bonding capability we previously thought impossible, added a Shen'tar xenobiologist. The transfer should not have worked. Human physiology is completely incompatible with Shen'tar pack structures, yet it did. Multiple species requested human medical liaisons for their diplomatic zones. Just as many wanted humans restricted from sensitive events. Too unpredictable, argued a Kelvin representative. They endanger themselves without proper risk assessment. They violate cultural protocols. The human delegation's representative stood. Ambassador Grant, career diplomat, looked deeply tired. Look, we don't like watching people die. It's kind of our thing. But she endangered herself for a species she barely knew. An insectoid delegate gestured frantically. For a cultural practice she didn't understand. That is not rational behavior. Yeah, Grant agreed. That's also kind of our thing. The vote took 3 hours. Humans would be granted expanded medical authorization across all diplomatic zones. They could intervene in medical emergencies regardless of species-specific death protocols. But there was always a but. They had to undergo mandatory cultural sensitivity training. Nora, watching the vote pass, turned to Vesh. I'm going to have to sit through PowerPoints, aren't I? Many PowerPoints. That's cruel and unusual. That is bureaucracy. 6 months passed. Nora returned to her regular duties as medical liaison, but nothing was quite regular anymore. She had a permanent Shen'tar honor guard. 2 warriors who followed her everywhere with the dedication of extremely lethal puppies. Grocery shopping had become an event. You don't need to guard the produce section, Nora would say. Protocols dictate, they'd begin. There are no assassins in the vegetables. Protocols dictate we remain vigilant. The wound had healed, leaving a scar that matched Kravik's exactly. A thin line below her ribs, about 6 inches long. She treated it as a conversation piece. Oh, this? Funny story. So there was this assassination attempt. The diplomatic circuit learned to expect the unexpected from their human medical liaison. Another incident occurred 6 months in. Different species. The crystalline Vex this time. A delegate collapsed during negotiations, some kind of cascade failure in their quantum structure. Vex cultural protocols were clear. Dissolution with dignity. No intervention. Accept the return to base elements as natural conclusion. Every delegate in the room looked at Nora. She was already moving toward her medical kit. Oh, come on, she muttered. Not again. But this time, nobody stopped her. The council chamber watched as she assessed the situation, pulled out specialized equipment, and started stabilizing a being made of living crystal, using techniques she was probably inventing on the spot. The Vex delegate survived. Afterward, Kravik found her in the medical bay, writing up the incident report. You cannot help yourself, he observed. It's a medical professional thing. We're all like this. That is terrifying. Yeah, we get that a lot. Nora finished typing, leaned back. You know what the funny part is? Everyone acts like I'm doing something special. But back home, this is just Tuesday. Every trauma center, every combat medic, every emergency responder, we all do this. We see someone dying. We try to save them. That's the job. Most species accept that death is sometimes inevitable. Sure. But inevitable and acceptable aren't the same thing. She gestured at her scar. I got this because I refused to accept that he was going to die. Would do it again. Will probably do it again, knowing my luck. Kravik's ears flicked forward. I am beginning to understand why humans are considered dangerous. We're not dangerous, we're just stubborn. Those are not mutually exclusive. 1 year after the incident, Nora stood in a lecture hall on Concordia 9, facing 30 new human medical liaisons joining the diplomatic corps. They were young, eager, nervous, looking at her like she was some kind of legend. She hated it. "All right," Nora said, pulling up her shirt to show the scar. "This is what happens when you do your job right. You might take damage, you might break protocols, you will definitely confuse aliens." The trainees leaned forward. "But here's the thing. We're humans. We don't accept that people die just because it's culturally appropriate or mathematically efficient. We don't care if the odds are bad or the protocols say otherwise." She let her shirt fall back into place. "We save people. Even when they don't want to be saved. Even when it's stupid. Even when it violates 600 years of tradition. Because that's what we do. That's who we are. We're stubborn like that." She paused. "Also, you're all going to have to sit through a lot of PowerPoints about cultural sensitivity. I'm sorry about that part." The trainees laughed, then applauded. Nora dismissed them, filed her lecture notes, and headed back to her quarters. Another day. Another group of humans being sent out into the galaxy to confuse aliens by refusing to let people die. Somewhere in the Galactic Council chambers, a private session was concluding. The Kelvin counselor reviewed a datapad with obvious concern. The humans have been fully integrated into diplomatic medical corps. And? The Threen representative didn't look up from his own reports. And we now have 38 documented incidents of humans ignoring death protocols to save lives. 38 times they've violated cultural norms, defied probability, and succeeded. Is that a problem? I don't know. The Kelvin set down the datapad. The mortality rates in diplomatic zones have dropped by 42% since human integration. Species that previously accepted high-risk scenarios as inevitable are now requesting human medical presence. We're seeing cultural shifts in how death is perceived. So they're saving lives and changing attitudes. Again, is that a problem? Maybe. Maybe not. The Kelvin looked at the statistics one more time. But there's something you should know. What? They're teaching other species, not just medical techniques, philosophy. This refusal to accept inevitable losses. 3 species have already reformed their emergency response protocols based on human methods. The Shen'tar are training their healers in combat medicine. The Vex are developing new rescue procedures. A long pause. "We should never have let humans learn about pack bonding," the Kelvin said quietly. "Now they think everyone is pack." The Threen finally looked up. "Is that such a bad thing?" Outside, in the medical bay, Nora finished her shift and headed home, trailed by 2 extremely dedicated honor guards who still insisted on checking her apartment for threats. She thought about the trainee who'd asked her after the lecture. What if the protocols are there for good reasons? Nora had answered honestly. Then we changed the protocols. Because that's what humans did. They saw a rule that said, "Let them die," and said, "No thank you," and found another way. They took wounds meant for aliens. They broke traditions. They confused the galaxy. And somehow, impossibly, they kept saving lives. One stubborn medic at a time.